For those of you who are on and logged in and watching, this call will be recorded or this webinar will be recorded, and we'll get that sent out to you all, anyone on the attendee list, in the next few days. If you have any questions as I'm presenting, please feel free to put them in the chat Q&A section, and we will try to get to those as much as we can at the end. If we are unable to answer your question, we'll definitely send some follow-up after to help you get the answers that you're looking for. All right, with that, I guess I'll dive in. So I am Bree Barbaro. I'm a manager of our threat hunting team here at Red Canary. I have been here a little bit under 4 years now, and I got my start in the industry just under a decade ago on an insider threat prevention team at Capital One, a Fortune 100 financial company. Worked there in a variety of different roles for several years, and then I pivoted into consulting, where I really took a look at how to help a variety of different companies of different sizes and industries help shore up their security and privacy program as a consultant. Before I got my start in cybersecurity, I actually worked as an emergency manager for a small city in New Hampshire. I had a pretty clear passion from an early age of helping people prepare. I knew we couldn't necessarily stop bad things from happening. We had no control over when they did or didn't, but we could plan for something happening. We could control how we planned and prepared for it and how we responded to it. And so both that role initially, as well as when I dove into my cybersecurity career, I took that mentality and that passion. And it's really something that I feel is incredibly important to help share with the rest of the community and help other teams across the industry prepare and plan and respond more effectively when something like, say, a ransomware attack happens. So today, I'm here to talk to you about modern ransomware and some steps you can take to stop it or minimize the potential damage. We've been talking about ransomware for a while in the industry. It's not a new topic by any means, but we are still talking about it in 2025. Why is that? Ultimately, ransomware is still incredibly lucrative for bad guys out there. We saw in 2024 payments up to $25 million, and that's a single payment for a ransomware attack. And the cost of non-payment often exceeds the cost of the ransom itself. So organizations who choose not to pay are even greater financially impacted. 4 of the 6 top ransomware threats that we observed in 2024 were actually carryovers from the year before, from 2023. So we saw Akira, Lockbit, Blackbasta, and Play remaining pretty strong as top adversaries and top ransomware groups that we were seeing impacting the industry. And then we saw Fog and Ransom Hub join the scene as relatively new players in 2024. Ultimately, whether you're protecting against those established threat actors and groups or the newer ones, it is so important to detect the precursors as early as possible in order to stop the impact of ransomware. It does remain that early detection remains that best mitigation approach. So at Red Canary, last year in 2024, we published about 90,000 threats. We did an analysis. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the trends in the threats we saw, check out our threat detection report. But within those 90,000 threats, the analysis we did indicated that 6 of our top 10 threats throughout all of those 90,000 were ransomware precursors. We almost exclusively see ransomware at an early stage here, which is really beneficial to our customers. But 6 of those top 10 threats, Impacket, Mimikatz, Sock Ghoulish, Bootloader, Hijack Loader, and Net Support Manager, are all ransomware precursors. So what is a ransomware precursor? Ransomware precursors are threats that may, not necessarily guaranteed to, but they may lead to ransomware activity. So they have the capability to deliver ransomware as a follow-on payload once they get that access into your environment. These often include droppers, RMM tools, or remote access tools, stealers, and testing tools. So that's why you see that Impacket and Mimikatz up there at the very top of that list. They can be used for testing, or they can be used by adversaries. It's really incredibly important because of how quickly these attacks move that we detect them and prevent them at these early stages. So looking at these early stages of a ransomware attack, again, we mostly see these at these first three stages. So that is initial access, reconnaissance, lateral movement style, impact, and techniques. We really want to focus on getting the alerts early and stopping the behavior as early as possible before it gets to that exfiltration and encryption level. So let's dive into some specific recommendations that we have seen be effective. My team has the opportunity and privilege to support a lot of different customers with a variety of different threats, many of which may be ransomware precursor. So taking some time today, I felt like was important to share with you some of the detection and mitigation opportunities that we've seen be successful in many of our customer environments. Looking at that very first phase of the attack chain, that initial access, we have both detection and mitigation opportunities really focused on RMM and remote access tools. So detecting the installation, creating rules and alerts that make sure your team is aware if those tools are installed in your environment, or if any unexpected programs are installed in your environment can really help increase that awareness. But better yet, if your organization does have the risk tolerance to potentially stop legitimate programs from being installed, and then give approval after, blocking them altogether. If it is not known to have a necessary business use case, it should not be involved. It should not be allowed to be installed in your environment at all. So making sure that you're blocking that whenever possible can really help stop that activity early. Going on to the credential access and privilege escalation phase, that's kind of between that initial access starting to get into that lateral movement. Specifically looking at detection opportunities for LSAS or AD dumping. If that activity is occurring, it may be legitimate, but alerting your team so they can take a look and confirm is this expected behavior or not allows you to get those clear indicators early. As well as detecting Mimikatz and Impacket. If those are executing in your environment and you're able to see that, you can confirm with your red team or your red team provider if that is expected, or say if it is not, you can block it early. And then from a privilege escalation perspective specifically, looking at making sure that for those privileged accounts, those capabilities within your network that could cause extra damage, those are either protected using zero trust policies or employing just-in-time passwords for some of those privileged actions, even if the account itself is privileged, is a good way of helping put in additional steps that make it harder for an adversary to escalate those privileges to perform those actions that we don't want them to perform. At the lateral movement phase, creating rules, there's a lot of different WMI commands, I know, but creating rules around suspicious ones that you don't necessarily expect to be used in your environment often can help you detect some of that lateral movement stage early, particularly looking at WMI commands for remote execution is a great one for that. And then for mitigation, blocking RDP is a great step in helping protect yourself against some of these attacks or the impacts of them. Some organizations need to use it for certain reasons. So making sure that if it does have a legitimate use case in your environment, you're severely limiting which users and IP addresses are able to use RDP. And then finally, at that impact stage, even if that is a little bit late, and at that point, you're minimizing damage instead of avoiding it. Looking at, I've talked about detecting some of the suspicious WMI commands, looking at creating alerts that let you know when there are WMI commands used for not only persistence and lateral movement, but also deleting shadow copies. That's a pretty clear indicator of something suspicious happening. So getting that alert to your team allows you to identify where this is occurring and how to help stop it. And then from a mitigation perspective, especially at that exfiltration phase, if an adversary is exfiltrating your data, really making it harder for them to get usable data if they're trying that. So ensuring that you employ strong encryption standards across your network but especially for sensitive data that's going to have the most negative impact to your organization if it were to be exfiltrated, can help minimize the impact of that. Any questions on these, we can you can put them in the chat, and I can get to those later. I saw a couple come in as I was presenting on this. So we talked about some of these more specific techniques, and now I'd like to share some higher level, more strategic actions that we've also seen be successful in customer environments. So from a broader scope, making sure you're monitoring all of your endpoints. Adversaries absolutely love blind spots because they're able to do whatever they want within those blind spots without alerting security teams. So making sure that there are none or are as few as possible in your environment is huge for empowering your security team to stop these attacks early. Also applying patches and updates, making sure that you do this consistently, continuously, aggressively within your organization. Sure, an adversary may be able to exploit a 0-day, but if you're not patching regularly, they can also exploit vulnerabilities that are days, weeks, months, maybe even years old. So taking a look at your vulnerability management program, having your security team partner with them, and making sure that those patches are in place. And also regularly reviewing exceptions. If a line of business or a portion of your tooling needs an exception, making sure you're reviewing those regularly and it's not just in perpetuity. So we really figure out how and when to patch those things as effectively as possible. This one's specific if you use Teams, but looking at your use of Microsoft Teams and making sure that you either disallow any external domains or you specifically list partner domains that are expected and necessary. This can help protect against particularly social engineering campaigns and spam bombing, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then from a more strategic perspective, a little bit less tactical now, auditing your perimeter devices and your public-facing applications. If it doesn't need to be public-facing, make sure it's not. There is a much higher likelihood of exploitation of vulnerabilities or potential initial access method if you do have those public-facing applications. So making sure you're minimizing that as much as possible. And then keeping a clear inventory of your approved tools and the use cases associated with those tools. That's going to help your security team set up alerts if things are used in unexpected ways. But it also helps you figure out what you can block. Making sure if it does not have a legitimate business purpose, it is not in your environment, and make sure it cannot be installed in your environment without first getting that approval and that legitimate use case being documented. And then finally, developing and practicing robust response and recovery plans. We can't always stop our organizations from being targeted by ransomware actors, whether it's an opportunistic targeting via a vulnerability that they happen to stumble on, or a specific targeting of your organization, but you can control how clear your incident response plans are, how well your employees who are involved in your incident response plans know the steps that they need to take to help protect your organization, and what steps need to be taken in order to recover as efficiently as possible. And then on top of all of that, there's one last thing that's so important across the board for any organization, regardless of your security posture, regardless of your size, your industry, employee education. Adversaries, particularly with modern day ransomware, adversaries are trying to turn your employees, your users, into that initial access method, into their first step into your network. And it is so important from a company perspective and from a security perspective to make sure you're arming them with the information necessary for them to become, instead of risks, actually become your first line of defense to help stop that from happening. Previously in 2023, we saw a ransomware group that got a lot of attention, Scattered Spider, using some really unique and aggressive social engineering techniques. Now, they were unique for a while in those techniques, but because of how effective they were, we've started seeing a lot of other adversary groups take those techniques and run with them. We're seeing some aggressive spam bombing. I mentioned that with Microsoft Teams. It can also occur via email, where users are targeted by an adversary. It could be an access broker, so someone who does that initial access and then sells it to a ransomware actor, or it could be the ransomware actors themselves, will aggressively target these users, flood their teams or their inbox with thousands and thousands of spam emails, stopping them from doing their work. They're overwhelmed, they're stressed out as a result of it. And then they get a nice little call from a very helpful person saying, hey, I notice you're dealing with all of these issues right now. I can help, just install this program. And the emails do stop. The issue stops for the user, but the issue begins for your organization. We've also seen, continuing on Scattered Spider's trend, fraudulent calls to IT support or help desk claiming to be a user with some information that they got via some other social engineering, asking to add a new MFA device, or saying, I'm having trouble accessing, can you get me access? And so that's a couple different ways that we're seeing these adversaries really kind of abuse the trust of users in general. So how can you help protect against that? Awareness campaigns. Most organizations do them about once a year. Why not increase the frequency? The more your users are hearing about the potential of this occurring, the more it's going to be front of mind if something does kind of feel a little bit suspicious. So increasing the frequency and potentially even expanding the scope, looking at taking the fake CAPTCHAs that we're seeing adversaries use for installation of RMM or remote access tools, looking at maybe testing out what happens if someone is receiving suspicious emails, but also suspicious Teams messages as part of your phishing testing and campaigns. Then also making sure your employees all know your standard processes. That includes the tools that they may be asked to install on their computer, or if that's not part of your processes for an IT and help desk perspective at all, then make sure they know IT will never ask you to do this. Make sure they are aware of how your IT security or help desk teams will reach out if they need to. And so if someone does call their cell phone and that's not part of your standard processes, you are giving them that power to say, hey, wait, this is not how this is supposed to happen. I feel weird about this. And they're more likely to hang up or terminate that social engineering attempt. And then finally, folks try to be polite. People want to be helpful and polite, especially to our coworkers. And so sometimes it feels rude to ask, hey, are you actually with my company? But providing them with questions and challenge phrases to ask in those situations that are kind of approved culturally in your organization can really help empower folks to continue to be that first line of defense, and to say if something doesn't feel right, they can challenge it. They know how to. It's within the rules of being polite still in your organization, but it can actually stop an adversary from being successful in that social engineering attempt. Again, any questions on here, pop them in the chat and we'll get to them after. But now I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit, put on a new hat or persona, and walk you through what I might experience if I were a Red Canary customer from a very early ransomware precursor alert through how I would kind of learn a little bit more about what's happening in my environment. So as a Red Canary customer, I have perhaps received an email, maybe a Slack message, maybe a phone call, however I wanted it set up to notify me that Red Canary's published a threat in my portal. So I log in and I take a look, and I see really clearly right off the top a clear indication that this is a very high severity threat and a clear plain text explanation of what it is and what happened. For me, this is super easy for me to get a complete picture of it. And I know if I want to understand a little bit more detail, not only is the endpoint itself called out, as well as the related identity right off the bat, but I can continue scrolling down and I can check out and understand what MITRE ATT&CK TTPs are in use with this threat, as well as what intelligence contributed to Red Canary being able to publish this. From there, I can scroll down into the threat timeline and see a step-by-step overview of what happened and when it happened. I can see when the threat was detected. I can see when it occurred specifically, and I can see specific things called out as indicators of compromise. For me, that's super helpful as an analyst to be able to investigate, and I don't have to decode anything regardless of my level of technical expertise. Now, if I wanted to, I could click this button and identify some actions for each step of this attack, of this threat. So maybe I wanted to ban the binary that was identified in this indicator of compromise. I could do that. But as a Red Canary customer, maybe I already had all of this done for me because I decided to use our active remediation service. So when I logged in, I saw the threat, I wanted to learn more about it, but now I also get to learn a little bit more about what a Red Canary threat response engineer, what actions they took on my behalf to help protect my environment and remediate this threat. So I have a clear indication of what occurred, as well as some clear recommendations for what I can do next to better protect my environment and my endpoints. If there is a threat that is out of scope for active remediation, or if, for example, I am not a customer who opted to use the active remediation service, I may worry what happens in the 5 to 10 minutes that it takes me to log on once I receive this alert, especially if it's after hours. But because I'm a Red Canary customer and I've been trained in how to use all aspects of this platform, I'm able to click in and see what automate playbooks that I have set up. Maybe take a look strategically with my team to say, what do we want to do? Do we want to establish some things that happen during business hours to make our jobs easier? Do we want to make sure that things are immediately isolated outside of business hours so that nothing bad can happen, even if it takes me a little bit longer to log on and see what's going on? So I can pop into an automate playbook. I can create one or pop into an existing one and see I definitely want IOCs banned. I definitely want the endpoint to be isolated, and I don't want those processes that exist on that endpoint that were marked as indicators of compromise to be able to continue. I can take a wide variety of other actions across a variety of different EDR platforms and other tools. They also have some identity related actions that I can set up in my playbooks. And then from a notification perspective, I mentioned there's a variety of different ways I could have been notified. Well, there are a variety of different ways. Maybe I want a Slack message. Maybe after business hours, I want my team to be paged. I have so many options to customize how this product works for me and make sure that I have that peace of mind to know that as soon as this thread is published, these playbook actions are kicking off. So now that I have that peace of mind, I have a lot less panic in my life as a customer when threats are published. I know that Red Canary's got my back there. So that might open up some time and some emotional space to be interested in what threats are happening in my environment, learn a little bit more about how we're being targeted. So I've got a lot of reports that break down those different threats. But let's specifically look at, as a customer, what I might want to learn about in terms of the top groups that Red Canary is observing, those top threat groups. So I can take a look and see how frequently they're seeing them in my industry, as well as across all Red Canary customers. And I can click into those groups that are reported as the top groups that are being seen and learn a little bit more about this specific intelligence profile, this specific threat group. I have a nice little overview here. I can also get some detailed summary. I can take a look at the TTPs commonly associated with this group, as well as some recommendations for how I can better protect myself or mitigate the risk of those TTPs being used maliciously in my environment. And then even more importantly, I can check out the coverage that Red Canary has for this specific threat group. This helps me keep that peace of mind continuing, even though I know that this group is out there doing bad things and potentially targeting my organization. Even beyond the threat groups, I can also dive in and take a look at the threat hunting that Red Canary is doing behind the scenes. So I know as a customer that if I am seeing a threat in my environment, or if the Red Canary team is seeing a threat in my environment, they will publish it as a threat in my portal. But What if I want to know about what they're doing behind the scenes that isn't necessarily found to help give me even more of that peace of mind? I can take a look at this page that details all of the different threat hunts that the Red Canary threat hunting team does. And if I want to know a little bit more about them, I'm able to click into one and see an overview of what the threat hunt was, what their major observations were, and then again, any recommendations that they have so that I can better protect my organization, whether or not that specific threat was found in my environment that day or not. All right, I'm going to put my Red Canary threat hunting manager hat back on. And we are going to take the little bit of time we have left to take a look at questions and see what we've got.
Saw a couple questions in the Q&A. One was about elevating accounts from normal accounts. So if you want to start with that one.
Yeah, so making sure, I think there are a couple different options there. But first, making sure that users aren't able to do that themselves is going to be key. There are certain settings, whether you have a cloud environment or it's directly on your endpoint, that will enable users to do that, and making sure that they can't. There are certain permissions that need to occur. And sometimes, depending on the level of elevation for that permission or privilege, there are automations that can occur where you can say, yeah, if someone applies for this, that's okay. But I would recommend for especially really sensitive privileges, making sure that it has to be human approved can really help there. And I can also take a look and see if there's other suggestions that my team has off the top of my head that just came front of mind. Calling from a help desk being legitimate. So that's where I recommended those challenge phrases or challenge questions, as well as being really clear on what process your help desk team will follow. So making sure that they do consistently follow the same pattern of behavior each time is hugely helpful in helping your employees confirm that this is a legitimate call from a help desk. So I don't necessarily know what your organization might use, but if your help desk team has a clear process and that's shared with your employees, that's a huge first step, right? You can also have someone, if the organization chart is easily accessible, and an adversary is, they don't have initial access, but they're trying to get in, they're not going to have access to maybe that employee's manager's name or their team members' names, but your employee will have that access to be able to validate it. So some questions like that of like, oh, could you confirm for me who your boss is? That your employee who's confirming that with the help desk agent is able to check in and confirm with your customer or with your company systems that that is true. But if the adversary doesn't know that, that's going to be a really clear indicator of, oh, well, my boss is, if someone's hesitating, you're going to know your boss's name right off the top of your head. If they're hesitating, that's probably a clear indication that something suspicious is happening. Any other questions that I can answer?
I think you knocked them all out.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all so much for your time today and walking through this with me. Really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day.